Dad always had a flair for the dramatic. When he heard his high school sweetheart had passed, he went completely off the rails. He donated his entire stock portfolio, see every single penny, and decided to become a monk. Left Mom high and dry with me and my little brother, practically homeless. Mom, though, she's a freaking superhero. She started from zero, collecting cans, flipping burgers at the county fair, worked her tail off. She not only kept a roof over our heads, but she opened her own diner, Mom's Home Cookin, bought a decent house in the suburbs. The day we moved into that house, the guy who abandoned us 10 years ago showed up on the doorstep. He had cancer, and he wanted us to pay for his treatment. I was at my desk, trying to meet a deadline, when Aunt Carol called. Honey, guess what? Your father's back. Aren't you just thrilled? Carol's voice was dripping with fake excitement, and my stomach dropped. That man, 10 years ago, he ditched his family to run off and find himself, after some old flame died. Now why was he suddenly back? My throat tightened. Where is he? He's practically at your place. After all these years, you must be dying to see your dad. Don't worry, your dad is here to stay this time. Your family is finally reunited. Come home quickly, Mallory. I hung up, my head spinning. Did Mom know about this? She's the kindest person on the planet, too forgiving. It took her years to recover after Dad split, and she's finally built a good life. I couldn't let him mess it up again. I dialed Mom's number, hoping to catch her before it was too late. I could hear her haggling over prices at the farmer's market, her voice cheerful. Mal, honey, I'm right in the middle of things. What's up? Relief washed over me. She didn't know yet. There was still time. I had to get rid of him before she got home. Mom, I'm craving lobster mac and cheese. Could you pick up a couple of pounds when you're done? The big ones. Lobster, huh? Those prices are always crazy, but okay, I'll see what I can find. Thanks, Mom. No rush. I hung up, told my boss I had a family emergency, and grabbed a rideshare home. Standing in front of my family's split-level house were a man and a woman. I have no idea how they even got there. The middle-aged man was wearing this simple outfit and a beanie, staring at the house with an impatient expression. Didn't I call? Why isn't anyone home yet? Ridiculous. He'd aged, his once handsome face now looked pale and sagging. But he still had that same arrogant attitude, like everyone should be kissing his feet. Looking at him, I felt a weird mix of disgust and pity. Back in the day, he thought so highly of himself because he was some English major, always looking down on my mom, calling her a simple housewife. He openly carried around pictures of his old girlfriend, writing poems and doodling about her. When he heard she'd died, he sat on the back deck, smoking all night long. I was just a kid then, but I remember him clutching her picture, crying, saying something like, "Eleanor, I'm coming to join you." The next day, he sold the house, donated all his money, and became a monk. The media celebrated their epic love story, while Mom and I were kicked out, living on the streets. Nobody gave a damn about how we were going to survive. And now he has the nerve to come back. Mallory, you're home. Carol spotted me and waved enthusiastically. Come on over. Oh, this kid, why won't she come over here? Seeing her dad must have knocked her dumb with joy. Dad followed Carol's gaze, paused and scowled. Took you long enough. You know how long I've been waiting. I ignored him, asking coldly, what are you doing here? Dad, already annoyed that I wasn't acting thrilled, got even angrier. What do you mean? What are we doing here? After all these years, you've forgotten how to address your elders? Zero respect. What did Donna ever teach you? Hearing him insult my mom made my blood boil. He still thought he was the king of the castle? Screw that. Who are you calling a bad mother? Your mother? What, you little brat? How dare you talk to your father like that? He caught himself, looking shocked and furious. He reached out to slap me, but Carol jumped in. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Hold on a second. This father and daughter are only just seeing each other, so there's no need to quarrel. Carol pinned Dad's arms down, gave him a meaningful look, and turned to me with a placating smile. Mallory, don't be like this. Aunt Carol knows that you've missed your dad so much over the years, so you feel upset. Actually, your dad has missed you too, and he came back to fix the issues from the past. Fix. I snapped. When he donated all our money and left us homeless, did he think about what Mom would do? What would happen to me and my brother? Now he wants to fix things? I don't need anything from him. Dad stared at me in disbelief. What do you mean my donating the money made you homeless? All the property and the money were the results of my work. Do I not have the right to handle my own money? Besides, I was hit hard back then. As my daughter, why can't you be empathetic? Does money matter to you more than relationships? I'd thought he'd feel at least a little guilty about what he'd done, but he was acting like he was completely justified. I almost laughed, but I couldn't waste my breath arguing with him. I'm not going to debate with you. Please leave. You're not welcome here. Carol, seeing things were going downhill fast, tried to smooth things over. Mallory, that's not what your father meant. Why don't we go inside? You both need to calm down. Arguing in the yard is just embarrassing. I'm not letting you in today, so get lost. Don't make me call the cops. How dare you speak to me like that? I'm your father. Dad raised his hand again, but Carol held him back, frantically winking at him. He calmed down, lowered his hand, and smirked. Fine, fine. A few years apart, and you've turned into a heartless brat. I won't talk to you. I'll wait until your mother gets home. Let's see if she dares to keep me outside. I clenched my fists. He had a point. Mom used to be so crazy about him that she chased him for years before he reluctantly agreed to marry her. Throughout their marriage, Mom was always meek, catering to his every whim. He messed around with other women, and Mom always forgave him, never willing to blame him. If she saw him, she'd probably forgive him again. I couldn't let that happen. I said, you're not welcome here. Get the hell off my property. Security. Security. We've got trespassers. Get them out of here. I screamed, grabbing a broom and swinging it wildly, trying to chase them away like stray dogs. If they wouldn't leave, I'd force them out. Dad got whacked in the face with the broom, sputtering and cursing as he backed away. Mallory, you're crazy. How dare you treat your own father like this? You'll be sorry. Don't call me by your first name. My last name isn't even the same as yours. I dipped the broom in dog crap and tried to poke it on their faces and yelled, Get out! Get out! Get out! The battle was raging when I suddenly heard Mom's voice. Mallory. I froze. At the end of the driveway, Mom was standing there with grocery bags in her arms, staring at us in shock. How could she be home so early? I tried to block Dad, but it was too late. Her eyes locked on him. Dad was taken aback. The woman in front of him, dressed in a silk dress, wearing makeup, looked elegant, completely different from the frumpy housewife he remembered. He looked awkward, wiping the dirt from his face, offering a hesitant smile. Donna, I'm back. This time I'm here to stay. I glanced at Mom, dreading her reaction. Instead, she smiled faintly. Well, look who it is. Her reaction confused me. I rushed to her side. Mom, call the cops. Get rid of them. Mom gently chided. Mallory, don't say things like that. That's your father, after all. Hearing Mom defend him, Dad relaxed. He'd been a little worried that Mom would resent him, that he'd have to work to win her back. But now it seemed he'd overestimated things. She was probably thrilled to see him home. His expression turned smug, and he reverted to his old, overbearing self. He pointed at me. Your daughter's got quite the attitude. Mom glanced at me, smiling and shaking her head. That's just Mallory. Don't pay any attention to her. Dad didn't want to make a scene. He chuckled. Why would I? He reached for Mom's hand. Donna, after all these years. Mom smoothly stepped away, smiling at me. Mallory, open the door. Let your father in. Mom, why should we let him in? Open the door, or are you going to disobey your mother? I bit my lip, pulled out my keys, and unlocked the door. Watching Mom's back, Dad, despite being a little displeased by her actions, figured that after being away for years, it was normal for her to be a little temperamental. He smiled, his earlier discomfort gone. Without waiting for an invitation, he strode into the house. Our new house was designed by an architect, and it was sleek and modern, sure to impress anyone who saw it. Dad looked around, seemingly pleased. Not bad, not bad. This house is big enough and bright enough, which will be convenient for me to read, although the decoration lacks taste. After I fix that. I said nothing, grabbed the grocery bags, and headed for the kitchen. It's almost 6. The feng shui master said the first meal in the new home should be eaten at 7 o'clock, so we don't have much time. Mallory, come help your mother peel garlic. Mom. I glared at Dad and Carol. Why were we letting them in, cooking for them? Mom scolded. Mallory, are you trying to upset me? Coming. I stomped into the kitchen, plopped down on a stool, and peeled garlic with resentment. Mom was always so thoughtful, so kind, and that's why people always took advantage of her. In the living room, Dad and Carol, seeing no one was going to serve them, sat on the couch. Carol stared at the house, tugging on Dad's arm. This house is amazing. It is nice. Spacious, good location, plenty of rooms. Dad spread his legs, acting like the lord of the manor. We don't need all these rooms, so you and your son don't need to rent an apartment. Just move in with us. The family can all live together, and it'll be lively. That's a great idea. Carol glanced around, acting like she was looking at her own new home. She stole a glance at Mom, then whispered to Dad. Brother, you were right. Donna really doesn't resent you. Dad sneered. Of course not. Do you think I don't know her? There were sunflower seeds on the coffee table. Dad grabbed a handful, started cracking them, and gossiped with Carol. When they ran out of things to say, he glanced at the clock and said to Mom, who was busy in the kitchen, Donna, where's Chris? Did you tell him I was coming? Mom was stirring the shrimp. She responded without turning around. He'll be back soon. He has class until later. Dad nodded, looking proud. That boy, he's doing well at that prestigious school. He must not waste the quality genes that I gave him. If he was like you, I'm afraid he wouldn't even be able to calculate simple addition and subtraction. He was getting more and more arrogant, completely forgetting that Mom was no longer the stay-at-home wife who was dependent on him. I was about to fire back when I heard the door open. Son! Dad jumped up from the couch, running to greet him. Oh my son, you look exactly like me. He couldn't contain his happiness, hugging my brother and staring at him. Chris paused, confused, and stepped back. Dad. Son, it's your dad. I'm out of the monastery, and I'm never leaving again. Aren't you happy? Chris stared at him, looking bewildered and confused. Why are you back? Then he looked at us. Mom, Mal, what's going on? Dad looked at Chris, then turned to criticize. Donna, why didn't you tell Chris earlier? At least give him some warning. Look at him, he's too happy and stunned. Mom didn't turn around. It's not a big deal. How could my returning not be a big deal? Anyway, son, did your class end? Are there too many classes in your senior year? Lab is busy. Chris's face was tense. He was silent for a moment, then hurried into the kitchen. Mom, let me help you with the cooking. This smoke is too much, you'll cough. It's okay, it's already done. You and your sister go sit in the dining room. Dinner is ready. Here, take this over. Mom handed the dish to Chris, then patted me and told me to sit down and wait for the meal. The food was on the table, and Dad came over and sat down. Not bad, not bad. Donna's cooking is perfect. Carol was a little embarrassed, but she didn't sit at the table immediately. Dad pulled her over. Don't be shy. This is family. Act however you want to. He sat with his legs crossed, waiting for food. Mom arrived, carrying the rice. The dining room table looked like a spread for a holiday, except the atmosphere felt like an impending execution. Mom set down a steaming platter of butter-drenched lobster tails, garlic butter, pasta, braised short ribs, and fresh crusty bread. The smell was rich and comforting, but every bite in my mouth tasted like sawdust. Dad didn't wait for anyone to offer him a plate. He piled 3 lobster tails onto his dish, slathered them in extra garlic butter, and began tearing into the meat with his bare hands. Grease dripped down his chin onto his faded beanie, which he hadn't even bothered to remove indoors. Not bad, Donna. Dad chewed loudly, talking with his mouth half full. Your seasoning used to be so heavy-handed back in the day. Seems you've refined your palate a bit. Though honestly, you could have used a touch more white wine in the lobster sauce. Classic French technique elevates basic shellfish. Chris stared at his untouched plate, his knuckles white around his fork. She didn't make classic French. She made dinner for our family. Family, exactly. Carol chirped, shoveling a massive portion of short ribs onto her own plate. She hadn't washed her hands after picking sunflowers in the yard, either. That's what's so beautiful about tonight, Chris. Blood is thicker than water. Your father was out there expanding his mind, seeking spiritual enlightenment, and now he's back to anchor this household. Anchor? I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. A anchor drags things to the bottom of the sea. Dad slammed his fork against the mahogany table. The sharp clang echoed through the dining room. That is enough. Dad snapped, glaring at me with dark, indignant eyes. Donna, are you going to let this girl disrespect me at my own dinner table? His dinner table. The audacity made my head throb. Mom had bought this custom-built walnut table last year after working 80-hour weeks at the diner. Mom didn't get angry. She didn't yell. Instead, she picked up her napkin, wiped a small smudge of sauce from the edge of her plate, and looked directly at Dad. With a calm, unreadable expression. Richard, Mom said smoothly, her voice as soft as velvet. Mallory is just protective of me. Can you blame her? The last time you sat at a dinner table with us, you told us that worldly possessions were poison to the soul, sold our roof over our heads, and left us with 2 suitcases at a shelter. Dad winced slightly, but quickly brushed it off with a grand wave of his buttery hand. That was a necessary spiritual purgation. I was in mourning. Eleanor's departure from this mortal coil ripped my soul apart. I was lost in the desert of my own grief. A true artist, a sensitive spirit, cannot be shackled by mundane domestic obligations when his higher self is calling out. A spiritual purgation, Chris repeated, his voice cold and terrifyingly sharp. For a 19-year-old. You left a 9-year-old and a 9-month-old baby in a church parking lot in November. And look how you turned out. Dad counter-argued without a shred of shame. Pointed a lobster shell at Chris. You're at an elite university. You're tough. If I had stayed and coddled you, you'd be soft. Adversity builds character, son. You should be thanking me for stepping out of the way so you could cultivate resilience. I thought Chris was going to jump over the table and strangle him. I reached under the table and squeezed Chris's knee, feeling him trembling with rage. Let's not dwell on the past, Carol interrupted quickly, fanning herself with a paper napkin. The past is gone. We need to focus on the present. Richards Health, for instance. There it was. The shoe was dropping. Mom leaned back in her chair, taking a slow sip of ice water. His health? What's wrong with your health, Richard? Dad's dramatic posture suddenly crumpled. He let out a long, tragic sigh, putting a hand over his chest as if he were starring in a stage play. I didn't want to burden you with this immediately, Donna, Dad said, his voice dropping into a raspy, weak tone that sounded completely fabricated compared to his booming shouts seconds ago. While I was at the retreat in the mountains, meditating on my past mistakes, I began to feel a deep, agonizing pain. I went to a specialist in the city. Stage 3 pancreatic cancer. Carol dabs at her dry eyes with a napkin. It's awful, Donna. Absolutely tragic. The doctors say there's a radical new targeted therapy program across the state. But it's experimental. Insurance won't cover a dime. How much? Mom asked. Her face remained completely impassive. Not a flicker of shock, sorrow, or fear passed over her eyes. $250,000 for the full course, Carol piped up quickly, plus living expenses for his recovery team, which would be me, of course, since I'm his sister and I'll be managing his care full-time. $250,000, Mom repeated quietly. It's a pittance compared to the value of human life, Donna, Dad said, leaning forward, attempting to look vulnerable. I know you've done well for yourself. With that little greasy spoon restaurant. You bought this house. You clearly have liquidity. I am the father of your children. If you pay for my treatment, I can stay here, recover, and we can rebuild our family. I am giving you the chance to make our story whole again. He was giving her the chance. The absolute, monumental delusion of this man was staggering. He was asking for $250,000 as if he were doing her a favor by accepting it. I opened my mouth to scream at him to get the hell out, but Mom raised a single hand, cutting me off instantly. Mom looked at Dad for a long, quiet moment. Then a small, gentle smile touched her lips. $250,000 is a lot of cash to withdraw at once, Richard. Mom said softly. I'll need to consult with my accountant tomorrow morning to see how to liquidate some assets without taking a huge tax hit. Dad's eyes lit up with greed. Carol suppressed a gasp of victory. Mom, I cried out, horrified. Are you insane? Mallory, hush, Mom said firmly, looking at me with a stern glance that held an odd, sharp intensity beneath the surface. Your father is unwell. We are civilized people. We don't make rash decisions at the dinner table. She turned back to Dad, her voice dripping with sweet accommodation. Richard, you and Carol must be exhausted. Why don't you sleep in the master suite? Upstairs tonight? I'll take the guest room downstairs. Well, if you insist, Donna, Dad said, trying to hide his smug grin. It's only right that the head of the house rests properly. By midnight, the house was silent except for the heavy, resonant snoring echoing from the upstairs master bedroom. Dad had eaten so much seafood and red meat that he'd passed out almost immediately, leaving his dirty clothes scattered across Mom's pristine hardwood floors. I couldn't sleep. My stomach was churning with frustration and betrayal. How could Mom be so blind? How could she let the man who destroyed us just waltz back in and take her hard-earned money? I crept down the stairs into the kitchen to grab a glass of water, only to find Chris already sitting at the kitchen island in the dark, staring at his phone. You seeing this? Chris whispered, gesturing to his screen. I walked over and looked down. He had pulled up old property records in court filings on his laptop. Look at the dates, Chris said quietly. Dad claims he went to a monastery right after Eleanor died 10 years ago, right? Look at these civil court dockets. From 8 years ago. He was sued by Eleanor's estate. What? Why? Because Eleanor didn't die broke, Chris explained, pointing to the documents. She was a rich heiress. Dad wasn't a selfless monk. He spent 2 years trying to claim her inheritance as her common-law partner. Eleanor's real family took him to court, completely annihilated his claims, and cut him off without a penny. Then he went to that cheap retreat center in the woods because he had literally nowhere else to go and no money left. So his whole devoted lover turning his back on earthly wealth story was a complete lie. I gasped. He only acted like a monk because he got crushed in court. Exactly, Chris sneered. And check this out, Carol's son Ricky? He got arrested 6 months ago for grand larceny. Carol lost her house paying his bail and legal fees. They aren't here because Dad loves us. They're broke, desperate, and hunting for a payday. We have to tell Mom right now, I said, grabbing my phone. Tell me what? We both jumped. Mom was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, wearing her silk robe, holding a steaming mug of chamomile tea. She didn't look tired at all. Her eyes were sharp, bright, and completely clear. Mom. I rushed over to her. Dad is lying to you. Chris found the court papers. He didn't become a monk out of grief. He tried to steal his ex's money and lost And Carol is broke because of Ricky. They're scamming you. Mom walked over to the island, pulled up a stool, and took a slow sip of her tea. I know, Mom said quietly. I blinked. You know? Mallory, do you really think I built a multi-million-dollar diner business and bought a $500,000 house by being an idiot? Mom looked at me with a faint, amused smile. I hired a private investigator the second Carol called me 3 weeks ago asking hypothetical questions about my financial status. Chris stared at her in shock. Wait, Carol called you 3 weeks ago? What? Didn't you say anything? Because, Mom lowered her tea mug, her eyes narrowing into cold, hard ice. If a wolf wants to break into your house, you don't fight it in the yard where it can run away. You open the front door, lay down a piece of meat, and let it step into the cage. I felt a cold shiver go down my spine. This wasn't the meek, heartbroken woman who used to cry over old photograph albums 10 years ago. This was a woman who had clawed her way up from the gutter, and she was far more dangerous than Dad could ever imagine. Mom, what are you planning? Chris asked, leaning in. Richard thinks I'm still the desperate girl who chased him around in college, eager for any scrap of attention he'd throw me, Mom whispered. He thinks. Because he was an intellectual, with a degree in literature, and I was a girl from a farm, that he is inherently superior. He spent 10 years treating me like dirt, and then he robbed my children of their home. She looked at Chris and then at me, her hands trembling slightly, not with fear, but with an intense, calculated rage. He thinks he can walk back in here, claim my house, drain my bank accounts, and pretend he's a hero for gracing us with his presence. Tomorrow he wants me to sign a draft agreement to transfer funds for his medical care and discuss adding his name to the deed of this house for family security. You're not going to sign that, right? I asked nervously. Mom smiled. It was a terrifying, beautiful smile. Oh, I am going to sign something, Mal, Mom said smoothly. And so is he. But it won't be what he thinks it is. Now both of you go to bed. Tomorrow morning, the play begins. By 8 o'clock the next morning, the house was already ringing with noise. I came downstairs to find Aunt Carol setting up a portable clothes rack right in the middle of our formal living room. She was unpacking boxes of tacky, outdated clothes and hanging them up like she was opening a boutique. What are you doing? I snapped, stepping over a box of old porcelain figurines. Oh, morning, Mallory, Carol said brightly, not looking the least bit embarrassed. Well, your father and I realized that upstairs is a bit cramped for all my things. Since I'm going to be his primary caregiver, I need my own space. I figured we could convert this formal living room into my bedroom. We just need to slide that expensive leather couch out to the garage. Before I could blow my top, a loud honk sounded from the driveway. A rusted beat-up sedan pulled up behind my car. A young guy with a dirty hoodie and scuffed sneakers tumbled out of the driver's side, dragging a massive duffel bag. It was Ricky, Carol's son. Hey, Mom, is this the mansion? Ricky yelled, barging right through the front door without knocking. He kicked his boots off right on Mom's pristine white rug. Damn, Uncle Richard wasn't lying. This place is sweet. Which room is mine? Ricky, honey, Carol squealed, hugging her son. Your uncle said you can take the secondary guest room upstairs next to Chris. Hold on a damn minute. Chris came running down the stairs, wearing his workout clothes. Nobody is taking any rooms. Who the hell invited you here? I did. Dad's voice boomed from the top of the staircase. He descended the stairs slowly, wearing a silk bathrobe he had blatantly stolen from Mom's closet. It was way too short for him, exposing his hairy calves, but he walked like he was royalty descending a throne. Ricky is family Christopher, Dad announced, adjusting the rope belt. He has had a rough couple of months, struggling against the harsh realities of the capitalist system. He needs a stable environment to regroup. As head of this house, I have granted him shelter. You are not the head of this house, I screamed at him. You don't own a single brick of this building. Mallory, control your tone, Dad said with an insufferable air of pity. Your mother and I are in the process of rectifying that administrative detail today. In the eyes of God and moral law, what belongs to the wife belongs to the husband. Your mother's success is merely an extension of the foundation I laid for this family. The foundation of homelessness. Chris shoved his way up to Dad, standing chest to chest with him. Touch my room, and I'll throw your stuff out onto the lawn. Is that a threat to an ill man? Dad puffed out his chest, trying to look imposing, but he ended up coughing violently, a loud, exaggerated cough that sounded entirely forced. Ugh, see what you're doing to my lungs? The stress. Carol, get my water. At that exact moment, the front door opened and Mom walked in, accompanied by a tall man in a sharp gray suit carrying a leather briefcase. Good morning, everyone, Mom said cheerfully, completely ignoring Ricky's muddy Boots on her carpet. I see we have a full house. Dad immediately straightened up, coughing once more for dramatic effect. Donna. Excellent. Is this the financial officer from the bank? Are we ready to initiate the transfer for my medical trust? The man in the suit stepped forward, holding out a calm, professional hand. Mr. Richard Vance? I am Arthur Pendleton. I am Mrs. Vance's estate attorney. Attorney? Dad frowned, glancing at Carol nervously. Why do we need an estate attorney for a simple cash gift and title update? Because Richard, Mom said, walking over to the dining table and pulling out a chair for Mr. Pendleton. We are dealing with a large sum of money. Mr. Pendleton has drafted a comprehensive agreement that ensures your medical expenses are fully funded, while protecting all parties involved. Dad's eyes narrowed suspiciously, but Carol leaned in and whispered in his ear. It's just legal nonsense, Richard. Rich people do this all the time for tax write-offs. Let her give us the money. Dad swallowed his pride, smoothed down the tight silk robe, and strutted over to the dining table. Very well. Let us handle the formalities. I have a very busy schedule today. I plan on reviewing the dinner menu for the week and overseeing the redecoration of the study. Mr. Pendleton pulled out several crisp white documents from his briefcase, laying them flat on the table, along with a sleek fountain pen. Mr. Vance, Mr. Pendleton began in a clear, mechanical voice. Before Mrs. Vance transfers the sum of $250,000 into the designated medical care account, and before any discussions regarding real estate equity commence, we require you to execute these sworn affidavits regarding your medical condition and financial status. Dad hesitated. Sworn affidavits? Yes, Mr. Pendleton smiled politely. Standard procedure. This document certifies under penalty of perjury that you have been diagnosed with stage 3 pancreatic cancer, that the funds requested are exclusively for active experimental treatments at the accredited St. Jude Research Annex, and that you currently hold 0 undisclosed personal assets or secondary revenue sources. Dad stared at the pen lying on the paper. I looked at Mom. She was watching him with the patience of a cat sitting outside a mouse hole. She knew his vanity, but more importantly, she knew his greed. Is there an issue, Richard? Mom asked softly, her voice filled with mock concern. If you aren't comfortable certifying your illness, of course we don't have to proceed. But without legal certification, my corporate accountant cannot authorize the release of $250,000. It would be considered tax fraud on my end. Carol nudged Dad hard in the ribs. Sign it, Richard. It's just a formality. Dad's greed wiped out his fleeting hesitation. He picked up the fountain pen with a flourish. Of course I'll sign it. My suffering is real, Donna. I am signing this with the blood of my agonizing struggle against mortality. He scribbled his signature aggressively across the bottom of every page, pressing so hard the ink nearly bled through. There. Dad shoved the paper back toward the attorney, grinning triumphantly. Now where's the cashier's check? And when do we go to the county clerk's office to put my name on the house title? Mr. Pendleton carefully gathered the signed documents, checked every signature with meticulous precision, and placed them back inside his leather briefcase. Turned to Mom and gave a subtle, decisive nod. Mom took a slow breath, stood up from her chair, and looked Dad straight in the eye. The sweet, accommodating smile vanished from her face. In its place was a look of absolute, terrifying icy contempt. There is no check, Richard, Mom said calmly. And your name will never be on this house. Dad froze. The smug grin on his face faltered. What? What did you just say? I said, Mom repeated, her voice ringing clear across the living room. You are not getting a single dime of my money. Carol stood up, her face turning red. Donna, how dare you? He just signed those papers. You promised. I promised I would act once he signed, Mom replied coolly. She turned to Mr. Pendleton. Arthur, please inform my ex-husband what he just executed. Mr. Pendleton adjusted his glasses. Mr. Vance, by signing those sworn affidavits under penalty of perjury, you have officially declared under oath that you have stage 3 pancreatic cancer and are seeking $250,000 from my client under pretense of emergency medical need. Dad's face paled from saggy white to a sickly green. So what? It's true. Actually, it isn't, Mr. Pendleton said, pulling out a thick manila folder from his briefcase. We subpoenaed your medical records from the municipal health system 3 days ago. You do not have cancer, Mr. Vance. You have mild heartburn and a high cholesterol level, likely due to a poor diet. What? I gasped, looking at Chris, who grinned wildly. Furthermore, Mr. Pendleton continued, you signed a clause declaring you held no undisclosed assets. Our private investigation firm confirmed yesterday that You recently inherited $60,000 from a distant relative, which you transferred into an offshore account in Carol's son's name to avoid debt collectors. Ricky, who was sitting on the couch eating a bowl of cereal, froze with his spoon halfway to his mouth. Hey, how did you find out about that? Shut up, Ricky, Carol shrieked, her panic bubbling over. Dad's jaw dropped. He looked at the signed documents in Mr. Pendleton's hands, then back at Mom, his eyes wide with horror as the legal trap snapped shut around his neck. You set me up, Dad stuttered, pointing a trembling finger at Mom. You tricked me into signing those. I didn't trick you into lying, Richard. You lied all on your own, Mom said, leaning across the table, her eyes burning with a dark, intense satisfaction. You attempted to commit grand larceny and fraud by wire, attempting to extort $250,000 from me using a falsified medical emergency. In this state, signed fraud of this amount carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 7 to 10 years in state prison. Dad collapsed backward into his chair, gasping for breath. This time his panic was genuine. Donna, please. Dad whimpered, his arrogant persona completely shattering into pathetic pieces. We were married. We shared a life. You loved me. I loved a man who didn't exist, Mom said coldly. I loved an illusion. The real man is a coward who threw his infant children out onto the street because he couldn't handle his own bruised ego. I was grieving, Dad wailed, tears finally streaming down his pale, sagging cheeks. Eleanor died. I was heartbroken. Eleanor was a woman who didn't even want you, I shouted from across the room, unable to hold back anymore. Chris checked the court records. She left you out of her will entirely. You tried to steal her family's money and got kicked out of court. You didn't become a monk out of love. You became a monk because you were a broke loser with nowhere else to go. Dad looked at me, then at Chris, his face twisting into a mask of pure ugly shame. His grand, romantic mythology, the epic love story the media had briefly gossiped about 10 years ago, was stripped naked and exposed for what it truly was, a pathetic series of failed cons. Now, Mom said, picking up her phone from the table, you have exactly 10 minutes to pack your junk and get off my property. Carol, Ricky, that includes both of you. You can't kick us out, Carol screamed, hysterically flailing her arms. I'm his sister. He has rights to this place. They were married. We were divorced 8 years ago, Carol, Mom replied, tossing a stapled document onto the table. A default divorce decree granted by the state while Richard was hiding in his monastery. He waived all spousal rights to my future assets, my business, and my estate. Legally, he is nothing more than a trespasser. 10 minutes, Chris said, stepping forward, his tall frame looming over Dad. Or my sister and I will personally throw you down the driveway. Dad didn't leave quietly. He wept, he begged, he cursed, and finally he tried to play his ultimate card. You think you've won, Donna? Dad screamed from the end of the driveway as Ricky frantically shoved their bags into the trunk of the beat-up sedan. You think you can just embarrass me like this? I'm going to the local news. I'll tell everyone that the famous owner of Mom's Home Cookin left her sick, dying ex-husband on the street. I'll ruin your business. Mom stood at the top of the porch steps, folded her arms, and looked down at him, like he was an insect under a microscope. Please do, Richard, Mom said softly. I've already rented the private banquet room at my diner tonight for the local business association meeting. The press will be there. Why don't you come by at 7 o'clock? We can tell the story together. Dad glared at her, his eyes flashing with a desperate, crazy light. You think I won't? You think I'm scared of you? He slammed the car door and sped away, screeching tires against the pavement. That evening, 7 o'clock came quickly. Mom's Home Cookin was buzzing with energy. The diner had grown over the years into a large, beautiful establishment with floor-to-ceiling glass windows, warm wooden booths, and a grand banqueting hall in the back. Tonight, the local Chamber of Commerce, neighborhood supporters, and several regional newspaper reporters were gathered to celebrate Mom's nomination for Business Person of the Year. I stood near the entrance in a black dress, watching the crowd. Chris was by the dessert bar, keeping his eyes glued to the front doors. At precisely 7:15 p.m., the front doors burst open. Dad marched in, wearing his ridiculous monk-style linen tunic, looking intentionally frail and disheveled. Carol was right behind him, carrying a handwritten cardboard sign that read, "Successful diner owner abandons sick family. Listen to me, everyone." Dad roared, his loud voice filling the packed restaurant. The clatter of silverware instantly stopped. Heads turned. Look at this woman. Look at Donna Vance. He pointed dramatically at Mom, who was standing quietly near the small stage at the back of the room, holding a glass of sparkling water. She pretends to be a pillar of the community. Dad shouted, stepping into the center of the dining room so all the news cameras could see him. She runs this diner under the fake image of home cooking and family values. But behind closed doors, she is a cold-hearted monster. I am her husband. I am dying of cancer, and she threw me out onto the street without a penny. She refuses to pay for my life-saving treatment. A collective gasp echoed through the room. People began whispering nervously. A local TV reporter motioned to his cameraman to start recording. Carol joined in, weeping loudly. It's true. He took a vow of poverty years ago. And now that he's sick, his own family turned their backs on him. She's hoarding millions while her children's father rots. Dad puffed out his chest, smelling victory. He thought he had trapped her. He thought the public pressure and the threat of a public relations nightmare would force Mom to buckle, hand over a check, and save her reputation. Mom didn't panic. She didn't cry. She walked slowly up the wooden steps onto the stage, took the microphone from the stand, and tapped it twice. Good evening, everyone. Mom's voice was clear, calm, and utterly composed. I apologize for the interruption to our dinner tonight, but it seems my ex-husband, Richard Vance, has decided to share a story with you all. It's not a story, it's the truth, Dad yelled, taking a step toward the stage. Richard, Mom said, looking down at him with an expression of quiet pity. 10 years ago, you abandoned your 9-year-old daughter and 9-month-old son. You sold our home, donated every penny of our savings to build a romantic myth around yourself, and left us to sleep in a truck behind a grocery store. The crowd murmured. Several longtime customers who remembered Mom's early struggles nodded in confirmation. For 10 years, Mom continued, her voice swelling with strength, I worked 16-hour days. I washed dishes, flipped burgers, saved every dime, and built this business from absolute nothing to feed my children. And for 10 years you never called. You never sent a single dollar of child support. You never cared if your children were dead or alive. I was seeking spiritual enlightenment. Dad barked nervously, noticing the crowd's glances turning hostile. That has nothing to do with my cancer. Ah yes, the cancer, Mom said smoothly. She motioned to Chris, who stood near the restaurant's media projector. Chris pressed a button on his tablet. The large white screen behind Mom flickered to life. Instead of pictures of food or diner achievements, the screen displayed huge, crystal clear high-definition scans of Dad's signed legal affidavit from that morning, alongside his official hospital medical records stamped by the state health department. This is Richard's official medical evaluation from 3 days ago, Mom announced as the projector zoomed in on the diagnosis line. As you can see, his organs are completely healthy. His only medical condition is acid reflux. The room erupted into shocked laughter. Dad's face turned bright red. That's a fake. She forged that. And this, Mom clicked to the next slide, displaying the signed affidavit Dad had executed that morning, is a legal document Richard signed under oath today, attempting to fraudulently obtain $250,000 from my business under the fake claim of terminal illness. The TV reporter's eyes went wide. He motioned his cameraman to get a close-up of the screen. And finally, Mom clicked one last time. Here is the police report from 6 hours ago. 2 uniformed police officers stepped through the back door of the diner. Richard Vance, one of the officers said loudly, walking straight toward Dad. You are under arrest for attempted grand larceny, execution of fraudulent legal documents, and extortion. Carol shrieked and dropped her cardboard sign. Richard, do something. Dad looked around the room in absolute horror. The cameras were flashing in his face. His old friends in the community were glaring at him with disgust. The grand narrative of the tragic, poetic lover monk had been ripped away, leaving behind nothing but a petty, pathetic scam artist being hauled away in handcuffs. Donna! Dad screamed as the officer pulled his arms behind his back, clicking the steel cuffs around his wrists. Donna, tell them it's a mistake. You can't do this to me. I'm Richard Vance. I'm an artist. I'm your husband. Mom looked down at him from the stage, her face completely calm, her eyes bright with the triumph of 10 years of hard-fought survival. You aren't my husband, Richard, Mom said softly into the microphone. You're just a customer who can't pay his bill. 2 weeks later, the autumn sun was shining warm and golden over our suburban backyard. The sky was a pale, clear blue, and the air smelled of crisp fallen leaves and sweet pine. Dad had been released on bail, paid for by liquidating the remainder of his stolen inheritance, and was currently awaiting trial for fraud. Carol and Ricky had fled the state to avoid being dragged into the legal mess, leaving Dad completely alone in a tiny, rented studio apartment downtown, living off government assistance and waiting for his court date. The media had run the story, completely demolishing his reputation. He was now locally famous not as a romantic monk, but as the pathetic fake cancer scammer who tried to rob his ex-wife. In our backyard, the walnut dining table had been brought out onto the stone patio. Mom, Chris, and I were sitting together under the shade of the grand oak tree. On the table were 3 massive plates of lobster mac and cheese, the real deal, rich with sharp cheddar, creamy Gruyere, fresh herbs, and huge chunks of sweet lobster meat. Chris raised his soda glass to the real superhero of this family, the woman who doesn't take crap from anyone. To Mom, I smiled, clinking my glass against his. Mom laughed, a bright, genuine sound that echoed across the peaceful yard. She looked younger, lighter, as if a massive, invisible weight she had been carrying for 10 long years had finally been lifted off her shoulders forever. I didn't do it alone, Mom said, looking at both of us with deep warmth in her eyes. I did it because I had the 2 of you to fight for. She picked up her fork and took a bite of the lobster mac and cheese. Mom closed her eyes, savoring the flavor. You know, Mal, this is good. But I think next time, I might add just a splash of white wine to the sauce. Chris and I burst out laughing. I took a bite of my own plate, feeling the warmth of the food, the comfort of the sunshine, and the absolute, unshakable peace of our true home. The shadow of the past was gone. We had fought our way out of the dark, and the future was entirely ours to enjoy.